Can you hear me? I think we're set. Welcome. And thank you so much for coming out tonight. It's been a long time that Fred and I have been corresponding. And I knew his late wife, Barbara, and we did a couple of projects together, but I have never met Fred until tonight. And it's just an honor. And he sent me the manuscript some time ago. And, you know, my water activism has been a slow growing passion over the years. But when I read Lake Effects, I felt like, oh, this man knows, this man understands the water issues. And I was really grateful for the book. And so when this evolved to have, I'm the warm-up act tonight. And I'm feeling really good about that, to have me read just a few excerpts from As Long as I Know You, and then Fred is going to take over. And As Long as I Know You is ultimately about my relationship with my mother. It's called The Mom Book, and that was its working title for many, many years as I worked through it. And if you met my mother, you would find her a beautiful woman, warm-hearted, generous, kind, all of those things. But our relationship was troubled. Her expectations of me were different from my expectations of myself. And as a result of that, we were on a collision course, even though she was a loving woman. And sometimes that happens in families. And I think when I think about lake effects, I also think of family effects. And the way the lake changes, I'm just going to draw this little metaphor here, the way the lake changes and the way Fred describes his love of the lake, I think it's also the way a relationship moves through the world. So that's my little analogy. I'm going to start with just an opening, four really short segments that because I want Fred to have as much time as he needs. And this first part is from the prologue, which is called Cessation. And just a little trigger warning here, my father has just passed away. The family is with him. And that moment just afterwards is where I'll begin. The world shifts back. We are half orphaned. Our family stands in a hospital room that is a field of silence, all about her, mother. She remains mother, parent, elder, and now widow. She is drive, control, shame, power, mourning, distorted, love, 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 all of it. And also, suddenly, I know this more deeply than anything else. She is alone. And now, an intuition springs from connection that has always been knife sharp between us. Her solitude will be specific, demanding, and mothers should have that. These women who wiped our butts, who raised us up, but hers is beyond me for one simple reason. I have not been a good daughter, and I don't intend to start now. The pattern was set long ago and can't be marred by breath or unbreath, except I know nothing of the work of grief, except I know nothing really of her or of myself. So this is a little bit, it moves, the book moves back and forth in time. And this is a little bit from the chapter named Buttons, and it is about childhood. Childhood, rivered with need, with talk that pools under the talk that talks. Childhood is about money. Not enough, not enough. Childhood is my dad wanting to plant some new field, but there is no money for seed. The cows have been sick and the vet will not come. Machinery is broken. Somewhere beyond us, something called communism is spreading, and an atomic bomb might right now be in the air falling. The Russians can do that. And there is no money. And now it seems we have a farmhouse of holes. My mother is worried about the holes, our shoes with holes, shirts with holes, sweaters and coats with tears like mouths open and panting. Holes, the fronts of our coats flap like doors in wind. Winter is coming. I am not yet 10, but I have already been taught the world is round. In science class, I have seen pieced together pictures of the world from those rockets that entered space for the first time and sent back the photos. So if you strung them together, you could see the curve, supposedly proving at last that this place was not flat, but round. I don't believe it. Too scary. I know it is false. Like the fake money in Monopoly, it just looks a little real. If you climb the hill behind the barn, you will see all the way to the lake, the edge flat. But then why does the lake disappear? My mother's question is full of the holes where knowing lives. Because you've come to the end of it, I think to myself, don't say it, don't say it. Because where the sky starts, that's the end of the world. Don't say it. She'll be mad for my sassing. As though she has read my mind, she says, no, something's always past the edge. And what happens there, Mom? My hands turn cold, the things I don't know. My heartbeat turns into the sound of rain. These are the thoughts I get lost in when I am trying not to get lost in the worry about the holes. Eventually, after my father dies, we have to move my mother to an assisted living place, and we have to clear the house, her house, and try to rent it to pay for some of what's going on. This is called Dynamite, and it takes place at her home. Sort, clear, stack. Sort, clear, stack. Mom's dusty kitchen is full of boxes sitting like squat security guards. I'm breathing dust that should be sampled for an archaeological dig and wrapping endless clutter when my sister, Mary Jo, bursts in the front door. Mary Jo has been cleaning Dad's storage shed behind the house while I pack this stuffy kitchen. Mary Jo says, I think we have a problem. Mary Jo is a problem solver, and she's good at it. So if she thinks something is a problem, it's a problem. Come look, she says. She's out the door, long striding through the unmowed grass and pines past the storage shed, headed to Connor's, the house right next door. Connor is our crazy, big-talking neighbor who my dad adored, my mom put up with, who speaks with a gravelly voice and has a fierce interest in all things weed. He has a perfectly legal medical card and is growing a handful of gorgeous plants in the backyard. We don't know if my father was ever aware of Connor's lifestyle, but I suspect that if Dad did know, he was advising Connor on fertilizer use. What we appreciate is that Connor looked after Dad and Mom and made sure Dad didn't have to plow the driveway in the dead of winter. Why has Mary Jo gone to get him? Within minutes, both are back at the storage shed where she has partially opened the old hinged doors, tilted as tents, gouging the grass. I join them, staring into the unlit cavern, just as I hear Mary Jo ask him, do you think that's what it is? They are not entering the shed. Con says, I never seen the real McCoy, but if I were to guess, I'd say, yeah, that's what it looks like. She turns to me and asks, do you know why Dad would have dynamite? Dynamite in the shed? And then Con is saying, until you know, you might want to close those doors real careful, like, and just not breathe for a while. Do not disturb and all that. Right on, Con. But this old building is disturbed and disturbing. Periodically, the trumpet vine nailed to the back weights down with bloom, yanks out the wall anchors and pulls down roof chunks as it falls. The roof leaks, the siding is pocked with rot, and now dynamite. I slide past their bodies, coats, so that I can see what they have seen, and there on the highest shelf, barely visible in the dim light, resting on heavy but decaying brown paper, eight sticks, faded red, the size and shape I imagine for dynamite. The sticks are bulbous with moisture and tiny crystals, and I can just make out the faded warning and fuse and skull and crossbones and other words blurred by age. Oh, shit. If it has a fuse, does that mean? And I back slowly out of the shed, making sure not to jostle any rusted implements. How long does dynamite stay? I search for the word. Stable? Khan's face screws up in thought. The shelf life of nitroglycerin? No clue, but that much, the whole place could go. The shed sits 6 feet from the back of Mom's house. Mary Jo lifts one broken hinged double door and with precise care pushes it into place, crosses, and latches it. She looks at me, and the question enters our heads simultaneously. Why would Dad have dynamite? And when I voice this to the man of the hour, Khan throws his hands, palms up. I don't know. You better let Tom and Rick know. Tom and Rick, our brothers, run Oomen Farms, where we all grew up a few short miles away, the farm that my father and mother ran. And from that small farm, my brothers built an operation known throughout the region. Though they were creating a success, Dad always shook his head at their risks. Dad was a cautious man, so dynamite seems out of character. Mary Jo asks, isn't this stuff outlawed? And Khan grins, like since the 70s, federal. So Dad kept an unstable explosive and broke federal laws? Khan's right. This is not something we can handle on our own. This is a family affair. We head back into our parents' house and Khan heads home, hollering over his shoulder. If I hear a big noise, I'll know what happened. And finally, this last bit, this is the title chapter, and it is how I found the title. She is, again, in the manor, this home. She's finally signed all the right papers, but I have never asked her this. What makes her daily life worth living? What I know, even though I helped create this life, I would be hard pressed now to live as she is living. Judge Judy, bingo, canned pears, starlings at an empty feeder, boredom, loneliness. Yes, we made her safe so she could stay alive, but what makes her want to stay alive? Mom, I need to ask you a question. Soft opening. She has a mother's sixth sense for alarm that never fades. It kicks right in. She looks at me sideways. What's wrong now? Mom, I figure you will live a long time yet, but I want to avoid what happened when Dad died. Us trying to figure out what to do if you couldn't tell us what you want. And so I wondered if you can tell me what it is that makes life worth living for you. So I would know that if you couldn't have that, whatever it is, I should let you go. I expect her to scold me for bringing it up. Tell me not to worry about her, that it's all in God's hands, which may be the case, but I'm not trusting God on all this that much these days. But my mother answers like it's a second grade question. Oh, if I didn't know you. I sit back. So if you didn't know, like couldn't interact with people, I want a more nuanced explanation. But she's clear. As long as I know you, she'd said it right the first time. Does she realize how this changes who we are? Thank you. Thank you so much. It is my pleasure to say that both Fred and I have books for sale afterwards, if you would like to find out what happens to the dynamite. And it is also my great pleasure to welcome this person I met for the first time tonight and who I admire greatly.
get the trigger right? You hear me yet? No.
Is the green light on?
Green light? Yeah. All right, folks. My technology is paper and body. That's about the best I can do. First, Anne-Marie has placed that moment in her book perfectly. That moment of recognition that gave her the title. And it's a fine book. If, I'm sorry, my word for it is, if tortured or difficult, but it's a beautiful book. Anne-Marie has written a mother-daughter book, and some years ago I wrote a father-son book. So we have another connection there, and mine is about my attempt to discover my father and somewhat about caregiving. So I'll read just a couple of things from it, called Hollow and Home, came out in 2017, and then I'll go to this, if I may. I guess I should sit. The mention of Clover Hollow, mention that in this book as well as here. That's a small mountain valley I lived in the Virginia mountains for 10 years with friends and neighbors who were fourth, fifth, and sixth generation descendants of people of Scotch-Irish and Germans who had originally come into that valley. And then I mentioned a man named James Cox, who was an extraordinary graduate professor of mine who later retired to his family farm in Virginia. So that's that. My father's death at age 46 possessed me for years. When I wasn't thinking expressly about it, his death was there nevertheless. I had wondered if I would have passed his age. I felt relieved when I did, but even then, I continued to dwell on him and my loss. I couldn't escape. It was the way he died, his suffering, my mother's distress, and her despair, my shock and confusion. That's what possessed me. Cancer killed him. It racked and wasted, and then it killed him. Near the end, when he had weakened so, I carried him to his bathroom and helped him sit on the toilet and then shower. He was so light, so emaciated, but soon even that became too much, and my mother cleaned him as he lay in bed. Near the end, he could not pass the night without a shot. I slept across the upstairs hallway with a long string attached to my wrist. He held the other end. When his pain became acute, he pulled the string. I had to drive a thick 2-inch long needle deep into what little muscle remained to relieve him of his pain. His hips, buttocks, and thighs were badly bruised and discolored from the frequent injections. We hated inflicting such pain and injury. Without morphine, however, his suffering would have been unbearable. And then this short bit, he did not go gently. I won't read that paragraph to you, but then I skip. It took several years and many roads back to find and portray the man before and beyond father, whom I believed Irvin was. By searching and writing, I restored my father to myself and to my sister. You gave me back my father, Linda said through tears after she'd read my book about Irvin. She was just 14 when he died. I found as well in this search the boy, young man, husband, lover, educator, and community leader I'd sought. And I do love that man. I admire and perhaps envy his generosity and concern for others, for all others, his goodwill, his playfulness, his great capacity to enjoy life and love the people in it, his organizational and leadership talent, his friends, home, and community. I'm impressed by the fullness of his world. It was a long search. Thank you. And then now, the book that I guess we're promoting. The first epigraph for this book is this: water, the greatest of desires, is the truly inexhaustible divine gift. I stood ankle deep in Lake Michigan for the first time when I was 2 years old. My fascination with the lake began then and has continued throughout my life. The lake has been a constant presence for me no matter where I've been, near the lake or far from it. I'm still deeply moved by the lake's mesmerizing beauty. I've been impressed by the way it sustains the economies and societies of every place along its shores. I understand the extensive culture it has enabled. I've learned how human intervention and carelessness have polluted, damaged, and degraded it. I know its power to drown swimmers, wreck ships, destroy beaches, and consume houses. I know the magnificent beauty and the danger and the destructiveness of snow and ice. I'm fascinated by this complex mosaic of the Great Lake. And then this first piece is origins, and that will give you some sense of where and how it started for me. And the epigraph to this piece: images of our earliest imagination govern our entire life. US 12 followed the New York Central tracks from Gary to Ogden Dunes and Lake Michigan. We drove there several times every summer until World War II interrupted visits with my grandparents. It was only 15 miles from their house to the beach, but to a youngster, it seemed to take forever, especially on those hot days when the car overheated, forcing my father to pull off the road and wait until it cooled. We turned left off the highway, crossed the railroad tracks, passed by a small guardhouse, then followed a winding cinder road toward the lake. My impatience grew with every turn, but finally we would arrive. The hot sand burned my feet as I crossed the dune toward the lake. The sharp dune grass slashed at my ankles. The glare made me squint. I carried a towel, maybe a few other things. My parents, uncles, aunts, and cousins carried umbrellas and picnic baskets. A few steps further, I could feel the cool air from the lake. Then we were there. And you could ought to buy the book just to show the picture of Freddie standing ankle deep in Lake Michigan. I don't know what I was pointing at or what I was thinking, but anyway, there you are. Primal childhood experiences transformed Lake Michigan into a place of lifelong desire, a magical, mystical lake, a place of longing and power so deeply embedded in my heart and soul that decades of experience and knowledge about the lake have left unchanged. I understand the irony. I've been captured by the magic of the lake and its mythical purity. I've also learned how polluted it was then and how invaded it has become by non-native sea life. Lake Michigan, even in my childhood, was suffering from industrial, municipal, and agricultural runoff. Some parts of the lake were even dying from lack of oxygen. We adjust, however, and the romance sweeps us away. Then this will give you some sense that Anne-Marie was suggesting. I try to find here of an initial sense about water. The epigraph here: I cannot sit beside a stream without falling into a profound reverie. Who has not sensed the magic, the mesmerizing appeal of water, even if it's only a creek or branch flowing down a mountainside, a small pond reflecting a blue sky, clouds moving across, casting shadows on the surface, an inland lake, diving off a dock, pushing away in a rowboat or canoe, pulling the starter on an outboard, casting a line far out. The torrent of water crashing down a mountainside at the spring thaw, the vastness of the Great Lakes, inland seas, and the oceans, or just rain, spatter, drizzle, downpour, the quiet trickle in a small fountain, or the explosion of water in a large one. The sights, scents, sounds, sensations of water. It is magic indeed. This now picks up to where I returned when I moved to Michigan in the mid-60s and became a Spartan for 20 years. I don't know. Do I dare say anything like that? Okay. Somebody's going to say go blue at the same time, I know. During our first summer in Michigan, I read almost every day about wretched conditions on the beaches. An alewife or river herring population had exploded in the 1960s. In 1962, the alewife constituted 17% of the fishery. By the mid-60s, it was 90%. They dominated the food chain from bottom to top by consuming plankton and preying on young trout. The native fishery then collapsed as it had once before under a previous attack, sea lampreys. By the mid-1960s, the lake could no longer support so many, and that caused a massive die-off. Billions of dead alewives littered Lake Michigan beaches. In 1967, alewife carcasses were piled up along 300 miles of Lake Michigan shoreline. The joke on the lakefront then, according to one local, was, "There's a pile of them. It's 6 inches deep, 6 feet wide, and 300 miles long." Only it wasn't so much of a joke. The carcasses and stench made the beaches virtually unusable. As much as the lake might have called, we didn't go for 2 summers. The entire tourist industry suffered. It was an environmental disaster. I mentioned Clover Hollow. I lived in Clover Hollow for 10 years and made all kinds of discoveries about myself and about my friends and neighbors there. My life in Clover Hollow led me to believe I'd escaped the lure of Lake Michigan. How wrong I was. We'd driven from Stratford, Ontario to Lake Huron. I anticipated nothing more than a pleasant outing, but when I stood on the beach and looked at the lake, I felt a sharp sense of loss and longing. My eyes teared, my nose filled, my throat choked. The sudden rush of emotion simply overwhelmed me. I couldn't control it. It brings it all back, doesn't it? My wife said. Yes, it surely does. I'd simply suppressed my deep emotional attachment. Then came the memories of water and waves, sun and rain on the lake, snow, ice, huge cloud banks, spectacular sunsets, driftwood, windrows of small plants, chafs, and litter on the beach, the feeling of sand between my toes, water washing against me. The fresh smells of lake water, the stench of dead fish, my long history with the lake. The Great Lakes seep through my body, live in my unconscious, hide, and then erupt in emotion, image, and idea. For days and weeks afterward, that rush of feeling was so fresh, so raw, I couldn't sort it out, let alone escape it. All I could say, I've got to go back somehow. To what? To the lake, to a presumably finished past, to a new life there? I didn't know. It was just an impulse. Okay. How am I doing, Betty? Okay. Not sure I'll get to the Dubai part, Anne-Marie, sorry. But I want to read this to give you a sense of the way this book attempts to be ironic in structure or discontinuous in a Louise Gluck quote. I picked that term up. So you have this, then you have this. You have this, then you have this. And I want to read you about the Carl D. Bradley. The epigraph to this chapter is unpredictable, massive, and unforgiving. The SS Carl D. Bradley set sail on November 18, 1958 for her home port in Rogers City, Michigan. The ship had just delivered a load of crushed stone to Gary, Indiana. Winds of 25 to 35 miles per hour were blowing when she departed. The course was taking her toward a storm of high seas and gale force winds, 60 to 65 miles per hour. For the first part of the trip, Captain Bryan, known as a heavy weather captain, sailed close to the Wisconsin shore for protection. Then he made the turn for home near Beaver Island. Late the next day, he reported that the ship was riding comfortably with a heavy following sea. The crew enjoyed a 4 p.m. dinner of hamburger and French fries. At 5:28, a loud thud resounded through the ship. In the pilot house, the captain and the first mate stared in horror as the ship's stern appeared to sag. The hull cracked, broke in two, and began to sink. The first mate sent a mayday, 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 mayday. This is the Carl D. Bradley. Our position is approximately 12 miles southwest of Gull Island. We are in serious trouble. We're breaking up. Captain ordered abandon ship, but the men in the stern could not lower the lifeboats. 4 crewmen in the bow did reach a life raft as the bow sank, but only 2 survived being thrown off the raft over and over by the massive waves. The ship exploded as it sank. It went down in water 350 deep, far out in the lake. High seas made rescue very difficult. A nearby ship that observed the sinking and explosion required an hour and a half to get to the site. 2 36-foot rescue boats from the mainland had to turn back. The Coast Guard cutter Sundew from Charlevoix took 5 hours to reach the search area. It did not find the raft until 8:37, 15 hours after the Bradley sank. This is the even harder part. During the day after, the Sundew and other vessels simply collected bodies. And 15 bodies were never recovered. So that's one of the reasons I read that is its power, me anyway, and it suggests how massive and unforgiving the lake can be, has been in the past, but also because of my family connection. My grandfather, this is why it was Gary and Ogden Dunes down at the bottom of the lake, was a mill superintendent at U.S. Steel in the Gary Works. My uncle was in the Great Lakes shipping business his whole life. And when he was in Rogers City, the Bradley was in port there. And one family visit, he took us on board the Bradley for lunch because it was known as the jewel of the Great Lakes. And my mother and her sister did 1 or 2 cruises on one of those lake freighters, on the Bradley, because it had such great cabins. Okay. My sort of like a director, you've been on the radio before, and you've got somebody behind this glass saying, do this, or slow down, or go faster. Well, there's a long piece in here about Traverse City, Bayview, Petoskey, this whole area. I spent one college summer as a busboy at the old inn in Harbor Springs out there, where all the rich people went. So this paragraph is a way of pulling it together and trying to give you some sense that that chapter is sort of like a tourist going through it, but also someone who's trying to think about it and react to it. The Bayview Inn and the village, Mackinac Island, the wineries, Traverse City, everything I introduced Beth to in 2018 and all I've written about exists because of Lake Michigan. The water, the expanse, its many faces still fascinate me. It is magical, even mesmerizing when it's quiet and resting along the beach under a bright, sun-filled sky, or when waves crash there and sand blows in my face, or when snow and ice build along the shore and the harsh wind chills me. I am captivated by it all. I marvel as well at the economic and social activity that goes on because of Lake Michigan. The lake enables and produces it all, and in a sense, owns it all. So I'm skipping a few things about Dubai and water. So this is the last little piece in this book. We were driving away from Little Traverse Bay, following the highway up a hill and out of Bayview. Behind us, reflected in the rearview mirror, I could see the bay and far out its mouth, Lake Michigan. We were leaving, and I wondered if I'd ever see my Great Lake again. Memories of Lake Michigan flashed by as the road lined by northern Michigan woods opened to take us away. The bay disappeared, but I visualized one more time walks across the sand dunes, my parents and relatives lying on blankets at the beach, the scattering of houses facing the lake, the waves breaking on the shore. Then in later decades, summers and winters along the lake, warm sun, calm water, blinding snow, ice mountains, hikes through the dunes in sun and shade, then looking out over the lake from a 400-foot dune. Delighting in Beth's wonder as she discovered Lake Michigan for the first time and learned why it has so captivated me. The memories and images flowed on and on as we drove further and further away. Time and age might let us come back, but also might not. So many departures are now true farewells, people never to see again, places never to visit. This might be the end of the lake for me. I couldn't help but think in fear. So I write, I look at the beach paintings from my grandparents' house. I study my South Shore railroad posters. I remember, I long, and I wonder. Of course, I am back, but still, you know, that could apply. Thank you. I want to say to Anne-Marie that I'm really grateful that she proposed this joint reading. And I've never had such a featured and accomplished person as my opening act. That's weird. Let me tell you. Thank you all. And I guess if there are questions, comments, we're happy to answer them.
How long did you live by Lake?
I've never lived by it, but I've spent many weeks and months in places along every summer. We would go over from East Lansing and spend time in a house. And my grandparents, you know, that bottom of the lake where Ogden Dunes then was a very small little place. Now it's a small town, but it has 1,500 residents now, paved roads, curbs, landscaping, and all that. And I can't remember actually how many visits, but would have been into my teenage years, certainly, because there's a little bit in here about, there's a long chapter on my grandparents. There's a little bit in here about my father and I getting on the South Shore Railroad and going into Cubs and White Sox games and things like that. So it's there, but I have not lived on the lake as such. And that's where what I'm doing, I think, is very different from what Jerry Dennis, for example, does in his wonderful books. This is a dual thing now. If you have questions, comments for Anne-Marie, please. Yes, sir.
You find it ironic that the alewives collapsed and there's not enough of them to feed the salmon that are in Lake Michigan?
Yeah, and I have something in here that suggests, seems to me, over time, as I look at it, there's problem, solution, and then further problem, and then solution and further problem. And there's a chapter heading in here somewhere that, or a paragraph that we try, but we cannot contain this lake, and that's one of the reasons to read about the Bradley, or to, it's still force of nature as much as we've intruded on. Yes, sir.
We've had quite a wide die-off this year.
Uh-huh.
This is right by the senior center.
I did read about that. Yeah.
Oh, that's nothing to touch on, okay? And
It's interesting.
there's tons of them around. A few weeks later, everybody's swimming in the same areas. Maybe that's not the best idea.
Yeah. Did people sort of shovel them aside to get to the water, or?
Picked up, they decomposed by that point.
Yeah.
Anyway, they had them there.
Please.
Two things. I do live on the lake in Glen Arbor.
Yes.
We did have a huge die-off this year, and, we understand that, the DNR had lowered the planting, and now they're planting more salmon because the salmon had died off, and the trout had taken over, and so now they're planting more salmon, and I understand that the alewives, one of the theories that we learned a long time ago was that, when they opened the St. Clair, Seaway.
St. Lawrence Seaway.
That's when the alewives started coming in, but I've heard other theories that.
But yeah, well, what I remember reading is that especially allowed ocean-going freighters to come in and dump ballast water, and that's why we got the quagga and zebra mussels that now really have invaded us. And well, the Seaway, then the Welland Canal, and so on, that gave access into the once upon a time protected lakes.
We didn't see alewives until 1961 on our beach, and by 1967, settlers got all.
Well, what you had suggested is that that then the salmon became too many, and they started to die off. So you get, yeah.
So the other thing is called Bradley, on our beach, the following year, and then really badly in 1960 and 1961. We had a lot of, we called it tar on the beach, but it was the oil from the shipwreck.
Oh, from the Bradley, you think? Yeah.
All the way down. We had heard that there was a shipwreck in 1958.
Yeah, and it was up high in the lake. Right. Yeah. Interesting. Wow. Okay.
I'm curious about when I read the manuscript, the range that you were touching on all kinds of things, from the shipwreck, and you talked about that wanting to turn the direction each time so that you wouldn't always be working with the romance of the lake, but you'd be working with the
Right.
brutality of the lake too, which I really appreciate. I'm wondering, as a writer, a little bit of a writerly question, how you figured out the order. I mean, how you figured out the balance, because it's not entirely chronological.
No, but somewhat chronological.
Mhm.
So I'm not sure I did it in the sense that, okay. But what I suggested to someone the other day is that, well, the style is a kind of mosaic in itself.
Mhm. Yeah,
You
I
know,
felt
you get
that.
these different pieces, but they all add up, I hope.
That's right. That's right. And that's
Something.
why it's impressive, is that if you read the book, it's like, it's like looking at a whole piece when you're done, it's,
Oh,
yes, indeed.
thank you.
Do you have concerns about line 5?
About line,
Line
Line five,
Line
the oil
five.
line.
Oh, yes. I've read about that and I don't know if the governor succeeded in having it shut off
Not yet.
yet.
There's been off.
Yeah,
According to Henry, it has to be the United States government, not the state government, tell them to shut it off. My opinion is somebody just send Marines up there and shut it off.
yeah. Well, I know it's been in there a long time and there's a real danger of it rupturing. Yeah.
Yes.
They have a record of polluting all across Michigan.
Uh.
And they have seemingly no time.
And if we think a lot of oil came out of a sunken ship, what would happen?
Yeah, wait
if
till
we
that-
had a
yeah,
rupture
that
in
rupture.
Pipeline, it would be disastrous.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. Absolutely.
You've obviously brought up a lot about the issues, the environmental issues, and you struck a chord here. But I just want to compliment you on how your memories of the lake and the images that you brought up from your childhood through your life resonate for me, and I'm sure for so
good.
many of
Thank
us.
you.
And it brought alive a lot of those things in myself. So
Oh, good. No, thank you. Thank you. Great.
I think you captured it, Linda, that there's it's a real love letter to the lake as well as an acknowledgement of its power.
I hope by saying that you didn't feel you've made a mistake because boy, we sure abused that. Your
Yeah.
comment. Apologies, but
No,
it
that's
was so
fine.
perfect, so perfect. I thought, wow,
I
okay.
think, yeah, it was in the blurb. Yeah. So,
Here's the nice thing. I was a full-grown adult when I fell in love with Lake Michigan on a ferry ride from over in Wisconsin to one of the islands, to Washington Island, and saw the beauty of Lake Michigan for the first time. And so you don't have to just be an innocent child who falls in love with the lake, but you can be a senior citizen and fall in love just as hard. And at that time, I lived in Iowa. Believe me, there's no waterways in Iowa that you'd want to spend much time on. And that love affair brought me to live in this town, and no regrets. No
Wonderful,
regrets.
wonderful. It's terrific.
yeah, I think the water activism that's rising now, especially among those of us who have moved here because we fell in love with Lake Michigan somewhere along the line, and we're reading material like Fred's material, and there's Jerry Dennis's and Keith Taylor and many of the writers, Allison Swan, who are writing about the lake now with a consciousness that I think is invigorating, because it's the gold of the future. It's the oil of the future, and we need to protect it in ways that we did not protect those other resources.
Yeah, and can a balance be restored? I
Yes.
don't know. It certainly will never be the lake of my youth, or as I say, if that ever really existed, this memory, imagination, and so on.
Yeah.
But there may be some stability that's possible, but it's big. The lake is big. Not like you're dealing with a pond or some kind of inland lake or something like that.
Yeah.
Fresh water in the world.
You mean all the Great Lakes combined? Oh, yeah. Yes, yes.
20% of the freshwater of the world located here. So that's a statistic that I really pay attention to, because it means that that commodity, that resource and that beauty are consolidated here.
Right.
You need to pay attention.
Once upon a time, there was some discussion, probably just vague and unrealistic about piping water out of the Great Lakes
Oh, yeah.
to the parched West. And now the West is in such serious drought now, who knows? Whether anybody can find the billions of dollars to do it, or whether the governors and the premiers of the provinces will say no.
Well, one
I
hopes.
first heard the statistic that she quoted, 20% of the fresh water in the world from a couple that were dancing during the Lewis and Clark bicentennial. And the gentleman was worked with the Army Corps of Engineers. He told us that number. And, you know, I was wondering why he was so serious about letting people know. And immediately I started to think, yeah, the Army Corps has designs on dividing the lake water with among 50 states perhaps. And I was thinking, how are they going to get that many straws into that lake? You know, but I then started researching things like that, and I found that a person in Frankfurt wrote an article about how the Nestle's company had petitioned our government and secured a law that those people whose wells were threatened in the area where the well was that was pumping Nestle's water out, nobody could come and sue on their behalf. They had to sue on their own behalf only. They passed a law like that. And that really angered me to think that somebody could do that. And one day I was trying to find the story that had been in a free press. I turned on a computer at a local library in Frankfurt, as a matter of fact, and I tried to find that story. I couldn't find it. So I typed in stories about threats to lake water, Lake Michigan water, or Great Lakes water. And the list came up, and I was just scrolling down the list of stories about threats to the lakes.
Mhm, mhm.
And my time ran out on that library computer before I got to the end.
Yeah,
Thank you.
it's serious.
Thank you. A few years ago, we went on a bus trip to Chicago. And part of that trip was a riverboat ride on the river. And we were told that at one time, Chicago took all of its drinking water for the city out of Lake Michigan. Well, the slaughterhouses also dumped their refuge
Mhm.
in the river. Consequently, that was going out into the lake, and the city was poisoning itself.
Mhm.
So what they did is they put locks in so that the boats coming through, they could still get into the lake, but the flow of the water went south. They never commented on how the people south of them made out with all the
Gotcha.
pollution from the city. But I guess that happened, and it's still going on at this moment.
I don't remember the year the direction of the Chicago River was changed. I don't remember that. I remember reading about it.
Yeah, I think but I don't remember the timing of it. But I know it was. You're right.
Now
And
one of the real, excuse me.
No, and I always wonder that, just changing the direction simply changes the victim. And- Right, yeah. And why aren't the businesses and the industries that use those resources held responsible for negotiating? Yes, well, yes, we know that that's the answer, but I just think that that's the first thing that might want to happen in terms of water consciousness, is that if you use the water, you must replace the water, you must clean the water, or you must be responsible for your waste. That's just seems
Now
like
one
a
of the
given.
problems, I think, is to keep carp from getting through
Yeah.
to the lake. And I think they've not yet found any carp in the lake, some DNA, but not.
Yeah,
They were working their way up the Mississippi River.
Yep.
But
Mhm.
maybe the old life was a problem. That's very much about.
Right.
But I think I mean, I'm not trying to discount any of that, but I do think that we need to think in terms of celebrating its beauty, making people aware of its beauty so they love it and they value it enough to become activists. And that to me is really important. Like, let's look at it. Let's let people know how gorgeous it is. Yeah.
That's exactly my point. I think what your book does is it brings up the love in many different ways in those of us that are familiar with water and especially with one of the Great Lakes. And then you also bring up the fact that it's a fragile resource and it's endangered and it's an environmental disaster. You called the alewife situation, which is the first time I've ever heard that termed an environmental disaster, and that's exactly what it was. So I think what your book does are two things. It allows us to love the water first and then care for the water second. So to your point, to keep this a positive thing.
Mhm.
So let's keep loving the lake. And as we do that, let's take care of it and be good stewards, right?
The, my book has 5 pieces, separate pieces on water. I read
Mhm.
only 2 of them. And near the end, well, I deal with water and its omnipresence everywhere in cultural, social, spiritual traditions, whether it's the way the Arabs use water or need water, or the way Christians do, or what have you. But it's, it's just fundamental. Actually, we're made of water in many respects. Oh, okay. I'm getting a sign back there from
Right.
the director behind the glass.
From the wizard.
Uh,
Thank you so much, everyone. for
Thank you very
coming,
much.
really. Thank you, Fred. To be here.